I felt like I'd found this magic potion because it took away that shyness and insecurity that I felt. It certainly gave me so much more confidence, and I thought that it was making me into the person that I was meant to be. I would start drinking and taking drugs, and I didn't care when it ended. I didn't care what happened. I just wanted to just get out of myself as much as I possibly could. I did used to think at times like it would be preferable if I didn't wake up. I didn't really care if I lived or died. Nothing externally changed, but everything internally did. That's how I sum up recovery.
Hello and welcome to 12 Steps and 12 Questions. My name is Silvio and I'm an addict. This pod is full of personal and inspirational stories of recovery from addiction. And in every episode I'll ask each guest the same 12 questions about their life, addiction and recovery. Quick warning, there will be some graphic descriptions and a healthy amount of swearing. For this episode, please welcome Jennie. Hi Jennie, thank you so much for being my guest on this new episode of 12 Steps and 12 Questions. Welcome.
Thanks, Silvio. Thank you for having me.
Now, straight away, I'd like to say one thing. I'm eternally grateful to you. You know this, but it's worth mentioning. It was your chair, the very first chair I ever heard in our home group, the Covent Garden Friendship on Friday group. It was your chair that really made me understand that I am having a similar experience as everybody else in the room, that I'm an addict. Things that you said, I'm obviously not going to go into that in detail now, but I remember particularly you saying things like you were hiding drinks from your partner and that you were in a situation where you wanted to stop but you couldn't, and you hated it when the sun was coming up. All those things resonated so much with me, and I'm just so grateful. I'm so grateful that you're here.
Oh, thank you, Silvio. That it means a lot that you say that, and I'm also so grateful to you to have seen like how you like grown through recovery, and it's a real pleasure to be here. So thank you.
Wonderful. Would you like to introduce yourself quickly?
Yeah. So my name is Jennie, and I am an addict.
Wonderful. Let's jump right in. Question 1 is, did you have any adverse childhood experiences?
Yeah, so there's not one or two experiences that stand out, but I think reflecting back on my childhood, there was a lot of things that did affect me. If you'd asked me before I came into recovery, did I have a traumatic childhood? I think I would have said no, because I didn't really have an understanding or awareness then of certain things and ways that things impacted me. But there was definitely, I really had a sense, like being a young girl, of I had quite a difficult relationship with my father, and and I had a sense of, not really feeling liked, and being quite like shut down and not sort of able to emotionally connect. And I think I felt quite lost at times, and I struggled with anxiety from being a really young child. I realize that now, but at the time I didn't really understand it, or what was going on for me. So I just remember feeling like in a lot of fear a lot of the time. And something that seems a really common theme in recovery is like sensitivity. It does seem that addicts on the whole tend to be really sensitive people, and I definitely recognize that about myself. And so I think that there's maybe things that happened in my childhood that perhaps, had they happened to someone who maybe wasn't so sensitive, wouldn't have affected them maybe in the same way that they did me. But I certainly sort of went through my childhood feeling very shy, very self-conscious, very full of shame, and and like full of anxiety and that stuff.
Do you have any brothers and sisters?
I do. I have a brother, a younger brother. He's not an addict, although actually one could argue that he's maybe addicted to different things like work. He's he's very hardworking, very successful. But,
And you were just saying, I mean, I recognize myself in this as well, right? So super sensitive child. I still think of myself as being perhaps the most thin-skinned person in the world. I can still hear my father say, "Oh, yeah, the boy, he's just so damn sensitive," and all of that, my mum protecting me and all that. Were you speaking about trivial things, or were there slightly more traumatic things really? If you're looking at them today.
I think I was kind of thinking specifically about there was a particular time where some friends made fun of me about something which really stayed with me. And I think probably my childhood was quite populated with things like that where maybe someone else would brush them off. And I also, I wonder if maybe I'd been a bit more like robust in my character, if whether the difficult relationship with my dad would have affected me in the same way. I'm not sure. I think it's, but I definitely think the sensitivity kind of plays a part in things.
Yeah. What were the difficulties with your dad? I mean, I'll tell you about my difficulties with my dad, if you like. So my father, God bless him, but he had his own struggles, and I just could not connect to him, and he would always point out, or at least that's what it seemed like, he would always point out all the things I'm not doing well, and he was really quite critical, and so on, and that really stayed with me. Was it something similar?
So I always had this sense, like when I was young, that like my dad didn't really like me, and I did have, so my dad's passed away now, but I did have an opportunity to bring this up with him, like before he passed away, and I asked him, like, why were you like the way that you were, like when I was a child, and he was really honest and said, I think I just didn't know what it would be like to have children, and I think now being an adult and being able to reflect on it, I think that my dad was probably really busy and really stressed, and had like 2 young children, and and I think that he just found it very, very difficult, and had probably himself been brought up in a family like where there was no kind of emotional connection, so my dad never hugged us or said that he loved us, and it did, that I'm sure that that did affect me, like I think as a little girl, feeling like you're not liked by your father, I think I realise now how that's impacted like the relationships that I've had with men.
Of course.
And he could be quite volatile, like quite angry, so I think I had quite a lot of fear as a child, of like his temper, or what how he would be. So I think probably all of that sort of played into a sense of like uneasiness that I had as a child.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Certainly also true for my father, that he came from a family where hugging or telling your child that you loved them or appreciated them wasn't really part of his upbringing. So I suppose it's difficult to ask something of someone that they have not learned themselves.
Yeah, and I think I feel really grateful for the fact that when my dad got older, and I think it was particularly after he retired, which made me realise how much of a pressure I think the work was. Like, I feel he became a lot softer as a person, and a lot more kind of tactile, and a lot, he would hug us and he would say that he loved us. And so it felt a bit to me almost like having two different fathers, like 'cause it felt very different to the father that I'd had when I was younger. But I feel very thankful that I was able to see that other side of him as well.
Yeah. So here you are, you're this anxious and quite shy kid. Even today, you're so soft-spoken, and you're growing into puberty and so on. And at some point, I'm assuming drugs and drink were introduced into your life. So our question too is, what did the moment you first got hooked, what did the fun times look like?
Yeah, so I think I was hooked on alcohol from the moment I first tried it. And that was around the age of 12, 13. This is interesting to me that I actually can't recall what the very first time I tried it was. And I wonder if that's because from the first time I picked it up, then I just wanted to keep drinking. And so from that age, it was always a part of my socializing. And I felt like I'd found this magic potion because it took away that shyness and insecurity that I felt, or maybe not entirely, but it certainly gave me so much more confidence. And I thought that it was making me into the person that I was meant to be. And now I realize that it was drawing me further away from that person. But at the beginning, like for me, it was mainly just alcohol. I used to smoke. It wasn't weed back then, it was hash, and I quite liked that. And that would sometimes be a part of my drinking. But I'd take drugs every now and then. But it wasn't really until my mid-20s that drugs really, my usage of them became pretty heavy. And I think even then, for the first few years, it was fun. I had a lot of fun with my friends. I had a group of friends. We were all doing the same thing. We partied like each other. We all stayed up all weekend, and and I think there was a sense of I was living in London at that time. I was living in Brixton. It was just it was a fun time. And then at some point it became not fun, and I'm not even really sure where
you crossed the invisible line. Yes, absolutely, of course. Yeah. It's really difficult sometimes to talk about the fun times without glorifying, right? Or without sort of falling prey to some sort of sense of nostalgia, which is sort of free of consequences, which of course it isn't, on the one hand. And on the other hand, there is a good reason why we talk about it, because if it's never fun, then you're not going to get hooked on it, right? If there isn't, the book speaks of the sense of ease and comfort that we get, the moment the book speaks of drink. For us, it may be drugs or whatever it is. So it is important to talk about it, I think. And I also had really good times, it's because the consequences hadn't quite arrived yet, so you were living in Brixton, you were having a good time, you were partying with your friends. Any particular highlights you want to talk about? Anything where you sort of, in terms of not party highlights, but in terms of the way it made you feel and maybe the problems that it took away, or you felt it took away?
I think it was always a similar thing for me. The reason why I kept using is because it took me out of myself, and I didn't realize until coming into recovery how disconnected I was from me and how much I really didn't like myself. And I think there was something I also learned in recovery is how much of a controlled person I can be. And I think that addiction gave me a way of letting go of that, letting go of control. I felt very much like there was two sides of me, the sort of the polar opposites. And And I actually really liked that feeling of just, I would start drinking and taking drugs, and there was a part of me that just I didn't care when it ended. I didn't care what happened. I just wanted to just get out of myself as much as I possibly could.
Yeah, it's that corset, I suppose. I mean, we can describe it in a gazillion ways, but I've often felt of it as a corset. Between all the fears and maybe some depression or something like that, and our inability to deal with life on life's terms, all those things. And then the moment I was able to use or to drink, there was that sense of, oh God, I was just the relief that would just pour through me. Just kind of go, oh, it's all not that bad really, and all of a sudden things look so much better. And if I'd had a fight with someone, I'd be like, well, they're only just another human trying to get through life. All of a sudden, I'd have all this kind of compassion for others and all those sort of things that I was unable to get just without the quote-unquote help of drugs and alcohol. So I can very much relate to what you say there. So this was the time where there were no consequences. So I'm sure that at some point they started to appear, though. Mine didn't appear immediately. They came gradually. What about yours?
Yeah, so the first sort of things would be just real unmanageability around work and just being really irresponsible as well. Like I was so immature, I think, that, and we say this, don't we, a lot in recovery about how we kind of stay the same age as we were when we first picked up. So I felt very much like a 13-year-old in the body of like a 27, 28-year-old. And I would regularly call in sick to work. Like in many ways, I actually wasn't a very functioning addict. Like I couldn't function with, or like on a come down, I just couldn't. So there was one job I was doing where when I was leaving and I'd got offered another job and they'd asked for a reference, and this workplace disclosed that I had something ridiculous, like 46 unaccounted absences in a year. And I thought, that is so, like, they have been so out of order there to have like to say to the new job, like, and I just wasn't able to, look at my part in things and actually like how bad that was. That almost certainly 85% of those absences would have been because I was too hungover to go into work.
Right. Yeah. We're sort of crossing a little bit into the territory of question number 3, which is, what were your worst consequences? And finally, your rock bottom, with the caveat, of course, that not everybody has one and that many people have many and so on, but as a vague concept.
Yeah, so externally, the consequences weren't terrible for me. I think I was very lucky that I jumped off at the point that I did. I was still hanging on to a job just about. I was still in a relationship, although it had got to the point where my partner, who's not an addict, had said to me, I can't do this with you anymore. Like, something needs to change. But really it was how I felt inside, and the fact that the drink and the drugs, really, they'd stopped working. So I was finding that whatever I was suppressing or had been trying to suppress through substances, all of like these difficult feelings, I just couldn't keep them down anymore, and I couldn't get rid of the anxiety, and my mental health was really suffering. And I feel like my using at that point, it really just became like self-harm. Or I think maybe it had been self-harm for a while, but I would just use more and more and more, trying to just alleviate the this anxiety or these like feelings of like fear, or I think there was a lot of grief going on for me that and I just couldn't. And there was a particular incident with we had a party. I was living with my ex-partner, and we had a party, and my behavior was just really off key, and I knew that he was going to leave me if I didn't do something. And so that's the point that I ended up coming into recovery.
Were you using every day?
Actually, like the end of my using was not the worst of my using. It's just the way that it was affecting me was so much worse. Well, I guess I wasn't getting any relief from it, so I was using a lot more, and it would just, the come downs were horrific. But there were points in my using, or for a long time, from the age of 12, 13, when I picked up alcohol, until my early 30s, I drank every night, or I could not sleep in a house unless I knew that there was sufficient alcohol, because I used to use alcohol to help me to sleep, even from that really young age. And so, but I never thought I was an alcoholic. Like, I thought my problem was cocaine, because I guess it was cocaine really that brought me to my knees. But I was never an everyday cocaine user, but there were times when it would be like 3-4 times a week, and many, many years of my life where it would be using all weekend.
Did you still have people come around, or did you still have parties towards the end? Because I remember essentially firing everyone from my kitchen table, and the 4 a.m. Chats that we used to have and all the rest of it, because I just wanted to use alone. I wanted to be alone. I wanted to isolate. Did you use alone?
I did at times, but actually because I hear this a lot from people in recovery, and it was a bit different for me. I couldn't bear to be alone. I think I had felt so lonely as a child. I just wanted to find people that, I felt like I was connecting with in the way that we do when we use drugs with people. And it's not a real connection, but we think it is. And so I would just hold people hostage all the time. I mean, as I said, like, I had a lot of friends that used like me. So it wasn't too hard to find someone who was, who wanted to spend the weekend drinking and using. But it would always be me that didn't want the party to be over, and it would be me who would be like, let's get some more, and just continue that, like, all weekend. I just didn't want to go home. I didn't want the party to stop.
This is something that I also remember very well. I mean, with all the stuff that I used before I first found stimulants, which is really my main addiction, right? I mean, all sorts of other things, but stimulants are really the one where all of a sudden I'd become that person who would never want to go home. Let's go and pick up another pack of pills at, 9, 10 a.m. the next day, or, the day after even, or even on Monday mornings, and so on. Eventually though, we'd have to, at some point, there'd be it the second morning or the third, at some point, everything is exhausted, and I'd feel so sticky, and it just so awful in my clothes and everything. And at some point I'd go home, and that was the worst, an undescribably awful feeling. What was that like for you?
Oh, just you saying it is just bringing back that fear. It makes me think of that Ian Brown song. Just...
Which song is this?
It's called Fear. Yeah. And it just... I put my ex-partner through a lot, and there was a lot of times when I would stay out because I just couldn't I wanted to avoid going home to like face the music, so to speak. And there would be so much shame and guilt that I would feel like in those like taxi rides home. And also like a lot of confusion. Like I didn't understand why this kept happening. Like why could I just not stop and go home at a reasonable time? Like I used to think to myself, like even if I could go home at like 3-4 a.m, that would be okay, but I just couldn't do it. And I used to like set reminders on my phone. Like reminders would come up like telling me to go home, and that if I didn't go home now I was going to regret it, and I just ignore them. Like as soon as I put a drink and a drug in me, all bets are off. And but those times like that, those come downs were just, in the end, they were horrific. Like I really would have been happy like not to have woken up at all.
Yeah, I going back there a little bit, just thinking about it, going home to face the music, or if I was using it at home, which I was more of a, as I said, I wanted to isolate. I did isolate, and then eventually, though, after 2 days or 3 days or whatever, the moment would come where I also was thinking what you were just saying there, facing the music, and feeling just like my world, like all those things all the things I was escaping from were coming back at me double and triple. It was just so much worse. And towards the end of my using, my come downs were almost like mental health crises, really, right? And I can really relate to what you're saying there. Question 4. Did you ever want to die? Did you consider suicide?
So I've never attempted to take my life, but as we were just saying, like in relation to the last question, I like towards the end, I didn't care. Like I didn't really care if I lived or died. Like, I did used to think at times like it would be preferable if I didn't wake up. And I would sometimes like take so much, like, I would be drinking so excessively and taking drugs so excessively, and then I would come home and to like knock myself out, I would be taking like pharmaceuticals and like things like that and drinking more. And like there were times when I'm pretty sure like I put myself like into a coma almost, like where I would pass out and like not wake up for like a day and stuff. It's just I don't know, like I actually think I was really lucky. I was really lucky like not to have suffered like worse consequences. I'm lucky I did wake up every time. Yeah.
I've said this many times on here, and I still think that it is true that if you use like I used, like you used, you accept deep down that there's a suicidal aspect to it. You accept deep down, that you putting yourself in danger. You could have a heart attack. You could have a stroke. And especially with mixing stuff, especially putting pharmaceuticals on top, or just the combination of alcohol and drugs, is just so dangerous. Normalized, but so dangerous. And I think deep down, certainly speaking for myself, I knew this, I accepted this. I was also, like you were saying, is quite similar. Even though I didn't try to take my own life, I also often thought, you know what, if I don't wake up, that's all right now. So I almost found some sort of peace in that moment.
Yeah.
As much as I am horrified by it now, about how low I sunk really inside in terms of my own morale and everything, Is that something that you felt as well?
If you're enjoying this podcast and would like other addicts and alcoholics to hear it, then please make the pesky AIs and algorithms work their 12th step. Hit like and subscribe.
Yeah, I really relate to that. Yeah, and it actually makes me think, this is kind of sad, but for a long time, like, I would find comfort in the idea of dying. Sometimes that would help me, like, get to sleep at night. It's very dark. It's and I think that's something that has probably gone on for as long as, like, my drug use did and longer. But no, I do really relate. Like, I think I said earlier that I think a lot of my using was self-harm in a way. And actually there were times that I did physically self-harm as well. Never to an extent that it endangered my life, but it all boils down to, the fact that, like I say, I really disliked myself and I felt really uncomfortable in my own skin.
Yes, yeah. Did you, before we move on to question 5, did you have any awareness? Or, I mean, I'm sure you've had some awareness around that time, but did you have any awareness? I mean, I knew I had a problem. It was pretty obvious. And yet I would never speak of myself as an addict or call it addiction. I was in therapy. I used all sorts of other flowery descriptions for my affliction, right? What about your awareness at this time in particular? Where were you at?
Yeah, I didn't realize that I was an addict. I knew I had a problem, and I had identified that I didn't have any willpower over it. And that had really flummoxed me because I couldn't understand why I kept doing it. And as soon as I had just like a sip of a drink, it was on. But I wouldn't have described myself as an addict or an alcoholic, because I think maybe, those words held quite a lot of shame. And I mean, again, this is something we always hear in the rooms, but I thought that an alcoholic or an addict was people that had ended up on the street, people that had lost everything. I didn't understand at the time that it really is just a case of, if when you start drinking, you can't stop or don't know when you're going to stop, or the same with taking drugs. Really, that's, what makes an addict. And so I struggled with it, with it a bit at first.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. So question 5 is, what other methods did you try to get sober before finding the rooms?
So I sought out a drug counsellor.
Right.
And I remember this guy. So I went to him and I said, like, I've got a real problem with cocaine. I can't stop using cocaine. What do I do? And he said, well, you need to stop drinking. And so reflecting on it, I think that he probably was someone who had gone through the 12-step recovery process, or certainly like understood that, if you're an addict, it needs to be a program of abstinence. But that idea to me at the time was just wild. I was like, what are you talking about? Of course I'm not going to give up drinking, because it had been such a big part of my life for so long. And I just couldn't conceive how I could have a life without drinking. And so I just sort of wrote it off. I just thought, no, there's like... this guy's not right. I'll find another way. But yeah, it turned out he was actually right.
Yeah. Did you try anything else except for this one visit? I mean, did you try to moderate, for instance?
Oh yeah, lots of times. And all the stuff like it says in the big book about, changing like your drinks and...
Yeah, talk us through some of those.
Oh, so there were times when I would only stick to like white wine, and then I realized quickly that was not the one for me. So then it would be like white spirits, and I would actually drink like vodka and tap water. And then I went through a phase of I would make sure that every other drink that I had was a soft drink, which I'm sure like is quite a good thing for people that are not alcoholics. But the problem is that I would be drinking for so many days that like it didn't matter that I was alternating with a soft drink, because I would just put so much like alcohol inside my body. It just and just things I would because it used to be a big thing for me to get together with friends to like drink before going out as well, and also quite often I used to like carry a hip flask with me. And so then sometimes I'd change those things around and I'd be like, oh, I'm not going to drink before going out, or I'm just going to have one glass before going out. And just all of these concoctions that like our brain comes up with to think how we might be able to control or manage this, which never happens. And in fact, the more that I tried to control it, the worse that it became. Like I feel like those nights where I tried to implement like being stricter with myself were the nights that would become the most chaotic.
Right. Exercises in moderation, I suppose. One of my favorite was just popped into my head. One of my favorite was one that I called start early, finish early. Right? That was the plan. Right? So if I start, to drink and use early, right? Afternoon or, maybe after lunch or something like that, I'd be done by a respectable time, say 10 or 11 a.m., go to bed, wake up the next day fresh. Never happened, so a bit like with your reminders on the phone. It is interesting, though, that whenever I did manage, because I'm a good, and this is not a compliment in any way, shape or form, but I'm a good white knuckler. So in other words, I sort of just by sheer just holding on, I'd be able to not use for a night or something. And then whenever I did that, the next binge was just, oh my God, it was awful. I would just go, it would just explode onto me. Is there something that you experienced?
Yeah, definitely. Actually, just you saying that. It was very like similar for me, because I did have times, not very many, but there were some times like you that I was able to, on some sort of willpower, or like it was fear usually. Actually, it was fear. It was usually when my behavior had been appalling and I'd really hurt like my ex-partner. That fear would maybe stop me for the next weekend, because I don't know, it's when you can see like the pain and the hurt in someone else's eyes, isn't it? Because I really didn't want to hurt him. Like he really didn't deserve it. And so I would be able to stop on that fear. But then like you say, then the next time it would just be out of control.
Yeah.
It's something about like suppressing that monster, isn't it? And then it just like, it
comes back at you with a vengeance. Yeah. I mean, I hurt my wife a lot, and she was the quote unquote main recipient of the damage really in my life, and obviously in hers as well. So, and it was quite similar when I felt that I'd really gone overboard and I'd really done something I shouldn't have, or behaved in such a way, or she gave me a talking to, and then again the next time I used in hiding, usually it was just got so much worse. It was terrible. Absolutely. So here you are, you've come into the rooms. Was there a particular event, or did you just come in because you just felt that it got on top of you?
So, I mean, it was that particular party, like where my behavior was really off key, that I thought, okay, I really do have a problem. I should probably look at this. But my actual introduction to the rooms had been prior to this. One of my best friends was an alcoholic. She sadly ended up like passing away from from alcoholism, but she had introduced me to the rooms. a few years before I came into them properly. And at the time that I went with her, it was under the guise of supporting her. But I think I did know at that time that I had an issue, but things hadn't got bad enough for me at that point that I was ready to look at it. And I sort of, I would go back to a meeting every like 6 months or so, but not really taking it seriously. But then at that point that I came in, which was probably around 6.5 years ago now, that I first started coming to meetings seriously, and from that point I stayed in meetings.
Mm. Which brings us to our question 6, which is, did you struggle with the word God?
Oh, so much. So much. And so actually the meetings that I used to go to with my friend were atheist agnostic meetings. They were the first, they were the first meetings that I went to, because I tried to intellectualize everything, and I had a really big ego about this word God, and like, because I thought it was religious, right? I thought I didn't even have my ears open to hear that it, God, when we use the word God in the rooms, it's it doesn't mean a religious God. It's just having a concept of something bigger than ourselves. But it took me so long in recovery to actually take that on board, because as soon as I heard the word God, I just used to switch off. Like looking back, it's kind of sad, really. Like, I used to hear chairs which are probably, had a really worthwhile message, but people would talk about God and I would just switch off, wouldn't listen. And yes, I did struggle with it.
Yeah. As you know, I struggled with it massively as well. Also bringing my intellect to the party rather than my heart, and trying to really wanting to work it out. What does that mean? Really try to comprehend, which of course is just not the way to go about it. How did you then solve that? I mean, for me, my entry point, funnily enough, we spoke about this at the meeting last night. My entry point into this was the fact that if I just use the word good instead of God, then that would just open the concept enough for me to get a foot in.
Yeah, so I think for me, so maybe initially, I quite like the idea of, like the rooms being like a sense of a higher power. But if I'm honest, I didn't work through a proper program for the first few years that I was coming to meetings. So I actually didn't give it too much thought. And it was only when I got into a huge amount of emotional pain, kind of an emotional rock bottom, like in recovery, that I realized like I had a choice here. Like either I go out the door and I knew that my using would go straight back to where it was, or I actually become willing to be open-minded to this program and really honestly try and work it. And yeah, I'm so pleased I did, because like the spiritual side of stuff is so important to me now. And it's been like, as you say, we talked about this last night, but it's been so transformative in my life that it's mad to me that I shunned it for so long. But I think just thinking about your previous question though, I suppose if I'm really honest, I still do have a bit of a problem with the word God. Not, I use the word God, but I have a problem with it in the sense that I think it sends so many people out of recovery and it prevents so many people coming in. And I understand why we keep the language the same, but I don't know. I think it can be a real sticking point for people, like as it was for me. So yeah.
It's. I mean, there's a reason why I've put this question into the questions that I ask, to the 12 questions, and Well, first and foremost, of course, if anyone is listening who is not in the rooms or who is just thinking about the rooms, first and foremost, you can bring your own God. This is why we are famously the worst cult in the world. You bring your own God, nobody wants your money, you can leave anytime you like. And the book is really clear also about this, that it is your own conception of God. And I have found, like you, that the spiritual part of the program is the most transformative. That is really where not just am I being separated from alcohol and drugs, I am also finding peace within myself and with this life and the ups and downs of it. And interestingly, there is a leaflet, there's an official AA leaflet about recovery for atheists and agnostics. And I read that at that time because I had a, let's call it, spiritual relapse about maybe a year after I'd come into the rooms, where the whole thing, I'd sort of put the whole, how difficult I find the whole God question aside on that sort of try it for 90 days and we'll refund your misery sort of basis. And that kind of caught up with me, but through good sponsorship and staying in the rooms and good fellowship and unity and so on, and working the steps again, I was actually able to make peace with it and find my own concept of God. And I struggle with my old concept of God sometimes still. I agree with you there, but not with my new one. And you look like you found peace with yours.
Yeah, it's hard, isn't it? I hear a lot of people say this, to conceptualize what their higher power is. I think for me, it's just love. It's a sense of love that kind of permeates like through everything. And just this sense of like feeling held by something greater than myself. And I have had some real like God moments.
We are just naturally crossing into question 7, which is, how do you experience your higher power, which is something that you've just related to, or are there any God moments that you would like to share?
So on a day-to-day basis, how I feel connected is it's actually like tingles like in my fingertips. And this is also like how I meditate through like feeling connected to this energy. And what I find is that sometimes I'm just walking down the road and I'll feel like these tingles in my fingertips, and then I'll be like, oh, hi God. Hey. But no, there's just such weird kind of synchronicity in life sometimes, isn't there? And I think it's something that I never noticed. I don't know if it didn't happen or I didn't notice it like when I was still using, because, you know, when we're so caught up in other stuff, we just don't notice really what's going on around us. But I always have a laugh with my sponsor. I'll say, oh, like this funny thing happened, and she's like, is it odd or is it God? And you know, and I really like, I see God working, like not you know, not just in my life but in like other people's lives around me. And yeah, I don't know, it's really beautiful. And I think what I will say is that I've had some really difficult times in my recovery. I've struggled quite a lot, like with my mental health in recovery, because I guess not having any substance to relieve any of the like difficult feelings and emotions coming up has been, it's been tough at times. And I found the COVID stuff really tough. But
the lockdown, you mean?
Yeah, the lockdown. But I have had like throughout this time, like this sense of being held by something greater, and that God won't give me more than I can handle. You know, there has been some really difficult days, but I've been able to get through.
Yeah. Question 8. Which parts of the steps were the most difficult for you?
I mean, I would say probably steps 2 and 3, based on how difficult it was for me to get my head around God. Because I think I have gone through about 6 sponsors, and I did have quite.
In how long?
So I've now been coming to meetings for about 6.5 years. I'm 4 years clean. So in 6.5 years, the first few years before I really started trying to work a proper program, I did have a number of sponsors that I would do the first 3 steps with. And I couldn't continue because I was lying. Like, I was lying on steps 2 and 3. Like, there was I thought it was crazy that I was being asked to, to connect with a higher power and to hand things over to a higher power. And it was there was a lot of dishonesty going on there for me. And
so you just paid lip service.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, fine. I'll make that decision now. I'll hand my world and my life over to my higher power. Okay. Totally.
Yeah. And and of course, completely like disingenuous. And then I would realize it's not going to work for me. And then move on to a different sponsor, and it was the same pattern over and over again. So I think those steps were the hardest. And actually, I would say that in some ways I still struggle with letting go, like with handing stuff over to God sometimes. That can be a real sticking point for me. It's something that I need to keep working at.
It's so interesting, this, because step 3 decided to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood him. I, at the time, kind of went, okay, fine, decision made, I have a prayer on it, and, and so on and so forth, and did not realize that this is a decision that I have to take pretty much every day. And there's a good reason why now I say the step 3 in the step 7 prayers every morning as part of my morning routine, is because it's a decision that I have to make and every day, and something I need reminding of. I think it's clear that many addicts do. I don't think that you're alone with that. Question 9. Which character defects give you most trouble?
I think initially, so one of the things that surprised me the most, actually, going through the step 5, 6 and 7 process was dishonesty. So I didn't realize like how much of a dishonest person I'd been. And it wasn't that I was actively lying to people, but I just didn't know how to be honest with people. I didn't know how to communicate how I was really feeling. I didn't know how to put in boundaries with people. And I told a lot of white lies, like, just it's silly things sometimes, isn't it? Like if someone's maybe invited me to something and I didn't want to go, instead of just being honest and saying, actually, it's not really my thing, I don't fancy it, I might create some like excuse or so that was a surprise to me, actually, like how much like dishonesty came up. And so that is a defect that I feel like I've done a lot of work around, and I really do try now to live as honestly as possible. I think there are situations where to be 100% honest would actually not be the best course of action. But on the whole, like wherever possible, I try to be honest. But I think the other things, which maybe won't be a surprise, after everything that we've discussed, is like control is a huge one for me. And that is very aligned with fear. Yeah, fear and self-centered fear. I can still get caught up in those things a lot. And, it's been a real like process, continues to be a process for me of like trying to let go of fear and just be held by God and just say, it's okay, I'll let you have this. Like, there's still stuff that I just want to like hang on to. And I know my sponsor says to me a lot like that sometimes I need to get into the most amount of pain with something before I'm willing to let go. And hopefully that's starting to change, but I have certainly noticed that being a pattern in my recovery.
They're linked, those things, aren't they? Fear, wanting to control, self-centered fear, therefore lack of faith, and not wanting to turn things over, wanting to control outcomes. I can so relate to this. I think your sponsor and my sponsor should probably have a cup of tea together at some point. Question 10. What is the best thing recovery has given you?
Someone shared this in the meeting last night, that I really related to when they said nothing externally changed, but everything internally did. And that's it, really. That's how I sum up recovery. It's being able to, or as a result of recovery and working a 12-step program, I've been able to gain like a greater awareness into myself than I think I could have spent 30 years in therapy and not had the awareness that we get going through the steps. And awareness is like the first step towards change, right? So now I have awareness, I can start to work on me and start trying to be like the best version of myself that I can be. And in line with that is sort of enlarging like my spiritual practice as well, and trying to work the principles of recovery, not just in recovery, but in my life outside of recovery as well, because I find that I can almost like go into the workplace and sort of switch off a bit from recovery and then be a bit of a different person. And actually, I want to really embody like things like thinking of others, being of service for others, like kindness, like compassion, and love for other people is so important to me nowadays, like to keep working on those things and keep trying to find those like feelings for other people, because I don't think I had much of that before. Like I did care about people, but I was so self-centered. I really, really did believe that the world revolved around me and everything was about me. And I didn't really consider others and, how I treated them and how my behavior like affected them. I was very like victim mentality. Oh, poor me, like, well, I'm like this because of this has happened to me and stuff like that. And like now, it's given me, recovery's given me an opportunity, like, I'm not a victim. Like I'm like I have the choice today. Like I can choose how I approach life and whether to take a positive or a negative mindset about things. And that's a really powerful thing. Like really like how I feel, like how peaceful and content I feel is my own choice. And I like had no concept of that before. And in saying that, that does not mean that I'm always peaceful and contented, because I'm absolutely not. But I can find it nowadays. And I think I lived completely without any sense of peace and contentment for at least 20 years of my life. More probably. Most of my life, like I say, 33 years of my life.
Wow. Question 11. What would you say to a newcomer or someone wondering if they're an addict?
Keep coming back. I heard something very early on in my recovery which really helped me actually, and I think helped me to stay in the rooms, because when I first came in, I was struggling with identifying with the terms addict and alcoholic and, did I really need to be here? But someone said, if you've ended up in a meeting, chances are you need to be in a meeting. And that's so on point, because people that don't have a problem with drugs and alcohol don't tend to end up in a recovery meeting. Like, if you've ended up in a meeting, things have got bad. And, you've probably already tried a number of things like to try to stop. So, if you're there, just stay. Yeah, like I said, just keep coming back.
Yeah. It is true. It's not the first place that you go to a meeting, is it? A 12-step meeting, if you've got any sort of problem, it's usually the last place that you go to. Certainly the last place I went to, and grateful I am for that. And our last question, Jennie, our question 12. What do you want your higher power to say to you, quote unquote, at the pearly gates?
Welcome home. I think that's it. I'll just leave it at that.
That is so brilliant. Thank you so much, Jennie. It's been a delight to talk to you. Thank you for your courage, for your honesty, and for sharing your beautiful message today with us on 12 Steps and 12 Questions.
Thank you, Silvio. It's been a pleasure from my side as well, and I really appreciate you having me. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Still rolling. Great stuff. That was so brilliant. Did you get to say everything that you want? Did you get to say everything that you wanted to say, or did you leave any? Was there anything that you feel was left out that you really needed to say?
No, I think. Do you know what? I'll probably go away later and then think, oh, like I couldn't have said that. But I sometimes just feel like with these things that, like, it's like doing a share, isn't it? What comes out is meant to come out. So I'll probably just go with it.
Yeah. I mean, from experience, I know that when people call me after they've done this and they go, oh no, but I actually should have said something like this and so on. I suppose I could have voice notes that people send me later and play them on here. But usually it is the way it comes out is just the right way, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, there's always more to say, isn't there? Like, this is why we don't just do one chair in our life, because there's so many different like aspects of recovery, and so many things or different feelings or thoughts and memories that might come up for me, like on each individual day. That but yeah, no, I think we'll just go with, like, if it sounded okay to you, we'll go with it.
Wonderful to me. I mean, I realised, not for the first time, of course, how much overlap there is, with our stories. I mean, of course, in recovery, I think first and foremost, I think you tend to. Everyone's welcome, and I love the variety, that we have in the rooms, and I really am trying to get as much variety onto this podcast as possible, of people of all walks of life and different sobriety times and so on and so forth. I think we all tend to, and I say this to any newcomer, find your tribe. We tend to find our tribe somehow with just the meetings that we go to, and the people that we hang out with. We find our tribe, don't we? And that's not necessarily to say that everyone in my tribe has had the exact same experience or very similar experience as I have, but there is quite a bit of overlap there, I think. I mean, what you said just now at the very end, you said nothing changed on the outside. And I heard that chair as well, didn't I, yesterday?
Yeah.
Nothing changed on the outside, but everything changed on the inside. That is exactly my experience. I live in the same flat, same wife, thankfully, and so on and so forth. But the inside is a total renovation job.
Yeah. It's so like that. I really did get so much out of that that chair yesterday, because that is my exact experience. I mean, although in a sense, I have had things change externally in that I went to live in Thailand for a while, but really, it's the internal stuff. It's not really the external stuff.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. And equally, like you were saying, I struggled very much with the word God, and I also obviously didn't see myself as being an addict, and I also thought that people who are addicts are people who live outside on the streets, and and they beg and all the rest of it. And there's so much overlap there, and certainly in terms of our preconceived ideas and the struggles that we've had. Well, it's so great to have you on. Thank you again.
Thanks, Silvio.
We've come to the end of this episode. Thank you for listening. If you've enjoyed it and would like other addicts and alcoholics to hear it, then please make the pesky AIs and algorithms work their 12th step. Hit like and subscribe. While this pod is based on the 12-step recovery program, it's not officially affiliated with any 12-step fellowship. 12 Steps and 12 Questions is not substance or behavior specific, it's fully self-supporting and not for profit. And you know this next bit. It's not allied with any sect, denomination, politics, organization or institution. It does not wish to engage in any controversy, and it neither endorses nor opposes any causes.